I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now and really listen to what I'm about to tell you. Because what I'm going to say in the next few minutes is not a theory, it is not a conspiracy, it is not alarmism dressed up as leadership insight. It is documented. It is forensically verified. It has been testified to under oath in front of the United States Senate, the British Parliament, and the European Commission. And almost nobody in a position of organizational leadership is talking about it because it is uncomfortable, because it is political, because it implicates some of the most powerful people and institutions on the planet. And because the system we're about to expose has been specifically, deliberately engineered to make you feel like questioning it is somehow extreme, when in reality, not questioning it is the most dangerous thing you can do. The tribalism tearing your team apart was manufactured on purpose by specific people for specific political and financial gain. This is not a metaphor. This is not hyperbole. This is the actual documented business model of the most powerful media and political infrastructure in human history. And it is operating inside your organization right now through the phones in your employees' pockets every single hour of their day. And here's the question nobody in your leadership development program ever prepared you for. What do you do when the greatest threat to your team's performance is not market competition or economic volatility or strategic misalignment, but a psychological operation being run against your people's capacity to think? Today, we are going to name it. We are going to name the people running it. We are going to name the strategies, the campaigns, the deliberate decisions that built this machine. And then, because this is the H2H experiment and we do not just diagnose, we operate, we are going to build the specific leadership tools you need to fight back. Because that is what this is, a fight. And the first step to winning it is understanding exactly what you are fighting and exactly who built it. Welcome to the H2H experiment. I am João and I am your host. Today we go further than we ever gone before. We are going to connect the most powerful macro forces operating in the world right now: political manipulation, algorithmic engineering, and the ancient technology of manufactured tribalism, directly to the crisis playing out in your leadership team. If this episode makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the beginning of clarity. And clarity is the only weapon that works against what we are about to expose. Let's establish something immediately and without any ambiguity whatsoever. The social media platforms that your employees spend an average of 2 to 4 hours per day consuming, Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube, they are not communication tools. They are not technology platforms in any traditional sense of the word. They are not neutral infrastructure. They are psychological operations infrastructure built for profit, weaponized for power. Every dollar of their combined hundreds of billions in annual revenue flows from a single source: your attention. Not your data, not your content, your attention, measured in seconds, auctioned in real time, sold to the highest bidding advertiser while you scroll. This creates one engineering mandate that overrides every other consideration, every congressional testimony, every mission statement, every public relations campaign about connecting communities. Maximize the seconds by any means the data supports. And the data, their own internal data, the data they buried, the data Frances Hogan risked her career and her safety to drag into the public record in 2021, told them something unambiguous and terrifying. Truth is boring. Complexity doesn't convert. Hope generates mild engagement. But fear, outrage, the feeling that your tribe is under attack by a dangerous enemy, that is worth 6 times the engagement of anything else. 6 times. Facebook's own researchers documented it, reported it internally, and watched their leadership choose growth over intervention. Mark Zuckerberg was in those rooms. He saw those numbers. He made the choice. So the algorithm was not accidentally optimized for outrage. It was deliberately optimized for outrage. Because outrage is the most profitable emotional state a human being can occupy. And an outraged person, cortisol spiking, amygdala firing, desperately seeking tribal validation, cannot stop scrolling. But here's where the story accelerates from corporate malfeasance into something genuinely darker. Because into this perfectly engineered outrage machine walked the political operatives, and they recognized immediately what they were looking at. Not a social media platform, a weapon. In 2013, a little-known data firm called Cambridge Analytica, funded by hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer, with Steve Bannon sitting on its board of directors, began developing what they internally called psychographic micro-targeting. The concept was straightforward and devastating in its implications. Use Facebook data as infrastructure to build individual psychological profiles of tens of millions of voters. Then, deliver individually calibrated political messaging designed not to inform, but to trigger. By 2016, they had harvested the psychological profile data of 87 million Facebook users without consent. 87 million people, can you imagine it? The fears, the insecurities, their tribal loyalties, the deepest psychological vulnerabilities. All mapped, all monetized, all weaponized. CEO Alexander Nix was caught on hidden camera by Channel 4 News boasting, between brackets, we were able to put information into the bloodstream of the internet and then watch it grow. The bloodstream of the internet. This data infrastructure was used in the Brexit campaign, in the 2016 Trump campaign, and in political operations across multiple countries simultaneously. It was not fringe. It was not rogue. It was funded by some of the wealthiest political operatives in the world and executed with the full knowledge that they were psychologically manipulating democratic populations at industrial scale. And Cambridge Analytica was not the end of this story. It was just the beginning. What they proved, beyond any legal or scientific doubt, is that human political behavior is not the product of rational deliberation. It is the product of psychological manipulation, delivered at scale through platforms whose economic incentives perfectly align with the manipulators' political ones. After Cambridge Analytica, did the platforms close the vulnerability? Did they rebuild the infrastructure to make this kind of operation impossible? No, they did not. They made it faster, they made it cheaper, they made it self-serve. Today, any political actor with a credit card and a Facebook business account can run a psychographically targeted influence operations against a population of millions. The infrastructure that Cambridge Analytica spent years and millions of dollars building is now available to anyone willing to pay for it. Democratized manipulation, available at scale. Used every single election cycle by operatives on every side of the political spectrum. And not one of your team members knows it is happening to them. Now, I want to go inside the brain, because to understand why these machines work so lethally effectively on even the most educated, self-aware people in your organization, you need to understand what is actually happening neurologically when your employees consume algorithmically curated political content. Your brain has what neuroscientists call a negativity bias, an ancient evolutionary feature. For hundreds of thousands of years, the humans who prioritized threats over opportunities survived. The ones who heard rustling in the bushes and assumed the predator lived to have children. This is not a character flaw. This is the price of survival. But it is also the most exploitable vulnerability in the human operating system. And both the algorithm and the political operative know exactly how to use it. Here's the loop they have perfected together. The algorithm serves you content calibrated to your identity profile, your political leanings, your cultural fears, your tribal affiliations. This content triggers a mild amygdala response. Cortisol rises slightly. Attention sharpens. You engage. The algorithm registers the engagement and serves you something slightly more extreme, slightly more threatening. The amygdala fires harder. Then comes the dopamine, the tribal validation of finding your people in the comments, the relief of confirmation that you are right and the enemy is real and dangerous. Outrage, cortisol, validation, dopamine, repeat every night for years. Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky has documented that when the tribal identity circuitry is firing at this level of chronic activation, the prefrontal cortex, seat of complex reasoning, long-term thinking, and genuine empathy, goes measurably neurologically offline, which means the colleague sitting across from your tribalized employee in your Monday morning meeting is not being processed as a colleague. They are being processed as a threat, as an enemy, as someone from the other side. No amount of team building, values workshop, or cultural initiatives fixes a nervous system that has been industrially conditioned to experience political difference as physical danger. You are not managing a personality conflict in your team. You are managing the downstream consequence of a psychological operation that was run against your people's brains, deliberately, profitably, and with the full knowledge of the people who built and operate these systems. Now, I want to zoom out further because what is happening through the algorithm is technologically new, but the underlying political strategy is as old as human civilization itself, the manufactured enemy. Every authoritarian regime in history, every demagogue, every political movement built on fear rather than vision has understood one foundational truth about human psychology. The fastest way to create unity is to create a common enemy. You do not need to inspire people with a vision of what could be. That is hard, that takes time. That requires genuine leadership, genuine policy, genuine courage. Instead, you find or manufacture a threat, an enemy that is dangerous enough to be frightening, vague enough to be unfalsifiable, and human enough to be hated. And suddenly, people who have nothing else in common are unified, not by shared values or shared aspirations, but by shared fear and shared hatred. Adolf Hitler used the Jews. Joseph McCarthy used the communists. Hugo Chavez used the oligarchy and American imperialism. They all understood the same thing. A population that is afraid and has a face to put on that fear is a population that is controllable, loyal, and resistant to any information that challenges the threat narrative. Now, look at what is happening today. And I'm going to name names because this conversation demands specificity. Donald Trump has built the most sophisticated enemy manufacturing operation in the history of American democracy. It is not accidental. It is not reactive. It is deliberate, sustained, strategically managed political technology. Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, Muslims as terrorists, the deep state as a shadow government of treasonous bureaucrats, the mainstream media as the enemy of the people, a phrase lifted almost verbatim from Soviet propaganda. The globalist elite, a term with well-documented anti-Semitic roots, deployed with plausible deniability. George Soros as the puppet master, Antifa as a violent revolutionary army. The 2020 election as a stolen conspiracy involving thousands of election officials across dozens of states, all coordinating in secret. Each enemy carefully selected, each one tested in rallies and on social media for engagement metrics, each one calibrated to activate the specific fears of a specific demographic, each one designed to perform the same structure function. You are under existential attack. I alone can protect you. Any doubt is betrayal. Steve Bannon, former Breitbart executive chairman, former Trump campaign CEO, and self-described practitioner of what he himself called flooding the zone with shit, explicitly and publicly described his media strategy as overwhelming the information environments with so much content, so much noise, so much manufactured controversy that rational analysis becomes impossible. His words, not mine, on the record. But I need to say again, because the H2H mission is truth, not tribalism, that the left has its own version of this machinery. It is less centralized, less charismatic, but structurally identical. The constant amplification of the most extreme right-wing voices, not to inform the progressive base, but to terrify it into loyalty. the manufacturing of fascism as an omnipresent, imminent threat to justify any political action, the social media cancellation machine that turns complex human beings into one-dimensional villains and then hunts them with the algorithmic efficiency of a crowd given permission to destroy. Different enemies, different aesthetics, identical psychological architecture. And both machines, left and right, are feeding directly into your organization through your employees' phones, through their news feeds, through their group chats, through the identity they walk into your office wearing every Monday morning. The ancient authoritarian technology of the manufactured enemy has found its perfect delivery mechanism, and it is sitting in the pocket of every single person of your team. Now, let me make this viscerally concrete with a scenario drawn from patterns playing out across industries and geographies right now. This is a composite, not one company, but the anatomy of a story I am watching repeat itself everywhere. Picture a mid-sized and professional service firm. 40 people, a leadership team of 6 intelligent, educated, experienced professionals. Let's call this company Meridian. Before 2019, Meridian had the normal range of political diversity. Some leaning left, some leaning right, but it was background noise. They shared enough common reality to disagree productively and return to work. Then comes 2020, the pandemic, the explosion of algorithmic political content, the systematic, commercially incentivized intensification of every cultural fault line, racial identity, institutional trust, class anxiety, national narrative, amplified to maximum volume by platforms optimizing for engagement and exploited by political operatives optimizing for power. By 2022, CEO noticed the temperature has changed permanently. Two of his most senior people, Anna and David, can no longer occupy a strategic planning session without the room becoming a battlefield. Their business disagreements have become proxies for something neither of them can fully articulate. Neither choose these lenses consciously. They were assigned them by an algorithm that learned which content kept each of them scrolling longest, by political messaging that told Anna that people like David were a threat to everything she valued, and told David the same thing about Anna. The hostility in that boardroom is not organic. It was manufactured upstream, delivered nightly through their phones, and is now expressing itself as a catastrophic leadership failure in a business meeting that has nothing to do with politics. The CEO tries the standard toolkit, site, facilitator, values realignment. It helps for 3 weeks. Then everyone returns to their phones and the machine resumes exactly where it left off. What the CEO never understood, and what cost him both Anna and David within 18 months, is that he was trying to solve an epistemological crisis with relationship tools. His team didn't need better communication skills. They needed a shared reality. And the most powerful political and technological infrastructure ever built was working 24 hours a day to ensure they would never have one. All right, this is where we turned it into action. And I want to be precise about one thing before we go there. The H2H mission is not to tell you what to think politically. It never has been, and it never will be. What I'm telling you, what the evidence demands you hear, is that right now, today, your team's capacity for genuine collaboration, collective intelligence, and strategic creativity is being systematically dismantled by a machine that profits from their division and by political actors who depend on their fear. That is your problem to solve, regardless of your politics, regardless of theirs. And here's the framework. First, name the machine out loud in the room. When tribal tension surfaces in your team, and it will, believe me, resist every instinct to treat it as a values conflict or a personality problem. Name the structural reality directly and without apology. We're all living inside information systems specifically engineered to make us fear and distrust people who think differently from us. Political operatives are spending billions of dollars to ensure that the person sitting across from you feels like an enemy. Our job today is to refuse to give them that victory in this room. Naming the external architecture changes the dynamic immediately. It gives your team a shared adversary that is not each other. Second, establish a primary source culture as a non-negotiable standard. Institute a clear norm. In strategic discussions, opinions must be grounded in primary sources, original data, peer-reviewed research, direct evidence, not narratives absorbed from feeds, not talking points amplified by algorithmic distribution. When your team knows that what they saw on X or absorbed from their content bubble is not admissible evidence in your room, you begin slowly and imperfectly to rebuild a shared factual foundation. Third, mandate structured sympathia. Formalize the stoic practice of Marcus Aurelius directly into your meeting culture. When genuine disagreement surfaces, especially when it carries the unmistakable heat of tribal activation, institute a rule. Before responding to a position you oppose, you must articulate that position back in terms its holder would recognize as complete and fair. Not the caricature, not the worst version, the actual, still-manned argument. Only then you respond. Fourth, architect deliberate cognitive diversity at the information intake level. The filter bubble that exists in your employees' phones exists equally in your organizational culture. Introduce a monthly practice. Each leadership team member brings one serious, long-form piece of analysis from a source that genuinely challenges their instinctive worldview, not to convert, to keep the reasoning muscle honest and the organizational blind spots visible and named. And now moving to my favorite part of our podcast, the H2H experiment of the week. This one is called the manipulation audit. This week's experiment has two levels. Run both. They will be uncomfortable, and that is the point. Okay, first, the individual. Look at your social media feed for 20 minutes with one specific question in mind. Who is the enemy this content is asking me to fear? Not what argument is it making, not what information it is conveying. Who is the enemy? And then ask the harder question. Who specifically benefits financially, politically, in terms of power, from me being afraid of that exact person? Follow the money, follow the power. Every time. Because the moment you start asking who profits from your outrage, algorithmically, politically, commercially, the manufactured enemy begins to lose its grip on your nervous system. And then the second action, which is as a team. In your next leadership meeting, before any agenda item is discussed, run this 5-minute exercise. Present one genuinely complex, contested issue, not related to your business, and ask each person to write down in 2 sentences the strongest arguments against their instinctive position. Share the answers aloud. Not commentary, no debate, just listen. You will immediately see 2 things. Who has been living exclusively inside a confirming echo chamber and who has been genuinely stress testing their own thinking. And you will begin imperfectly, slowly, but really, to rebuild a culture where intellectual honesty is valued above tribal loyalty. That is the only kind of culture that can navigate what is coming. All right, now let's wrap up this episode. Wake up. The fight is already happening. I want to leave you with something that I need you to sit with after this episode ends. The people who built these systems know exactly what they built. Zuckerberg knew. The engineers who designed engagement algorithms knew. Steve Bannon explicitly described his strategy as information warfare. The political operatives who used Cambridge Analytica infrastructure knew they were running a psychological operation on the democratic populations. They knew, they chose, and they are still choosing every single day to continue. This is not a bug in the system. This is the system. A system that has made some people almost incomprehensibly wealthy and powerful by selling your employees' capacity for rational thought to the highest bidding advertiser or political operative. Your team is not broken. Your team is occupied. Occupied by a psychological operation more sophisticated than anything a military intelligence agency has ever deployed against a foreign enemy. And it is being run against your own people in your own country using their own phones every single night. And you? Sitting at the head of that leadership table, watching your best people turn into proxies for a culture war that was manufactured in a political strategy room and delivered via algorithm, You are the last line of defense, not the government, not the platforms, not the regulators who have spent a decade holding hearings and changing nothing. You in your organization, with your people, every single day. The leaders who will matter in the next decade are not the ones who had the best strategy deck or the most elegant culture framework. They are the ones who had the courage to look at this system directly, name it without flinching, and build something human enough and strong enough to survive it. That is the H2H challenge, and it starts now. If you enjoyed this episode, also follow our ongoing deep dives on LinkedIn and Substack. Join the global community at the h2hexperiment.com and on the ECXO platform. And also explore the HX Revolution book series that is available on Amazon. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to look at the machine and at the hands that are operating it without blinking. And thank you for choosing, in a world that profits from your fear and your division, to think, to lead, and to fight back. Because the most radical act of leadership today is not disruption. It is refusing to be a weapon in someone else's war. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.